If that morning Lila Monroe had opened the diner door the way she always did, she would have died. Not in a loud, dramatic way. Just a short blast, a flash of fire beneath the threshold, and her name would have appeared in a small local newspaper, buried in a brief column. But at 5:30 in the morning, before the alarm clock had a chance to ring, Lila was already awake. She always woke before the alarm. Her body did not allow weakness. It did not allow oversleeping. It did not allow mistakes. Outside her third-floor apartment, snow covered the rooftops of St. Paul, Minnesota. The streetlights cast a dull, yellow glow over the ice, cold as metal. Lila lay still for a few seconds, listening. Through the thin wall, her mother's breathing rose and fell slowly. No spasms, no choking. After 2 strokes, every peaceful night felt like a small miracle. Lila exhaled softly, then pushed herself up. Her movements were neat and decisive. No one was watching, yet she lived as if someone were always keeping score. In the next room, Evelyn Monroe lay on her side, the left half of her body motionless like a piece of wood. Her face had once been radiant, now drawn by the after-effects of illness. Lila bent down, adjusted the blanket, and smoothed back hair that had turned gray far too quickly. "I am going to work, Mom. The medicine is in the blue box. 2 pills after you eat." She wrote those same words on a piece of paper, even though she knew her mother might not read them clearly. She wrote them anyway, because hope, no matter how fragile, still needed a concrete shape. There was no hot water in the apartment. The electricity bill was overdue. A bright orange envelope lay on the table, the word "notice" printed in bold like an accusation. Lila looked at it for a second, then folded it and slipped it into her coat pocket. Not today. Today she only needed to survive 1 shift. She walked down the dark stairwell, her worn shoes brushing against the wooden steps with a soft sound. Winter wind struck her face as soon as the apartment door opened. The temperature was deep below freezing. Her breath turned to white smoke. North Star Diner was a 20-minute walk away. Lila was always the one who opened at 6. She turned the key, switched on the lights, started the coffee machine, wiped the tables, arranged the chairs. No one saw her during that hour. When customers arrived, everything was ready, as if it had come into being on its own. That was her silent power. She had no degree, no money, no voice. Yet the entire diner ran on her rhythm. Derek Klein, the owner, had never recognized that, or perhaps he did, and that was exactly why he disliked her. As Lila slid the key into the back door lock, she heard a rustling sound near the dumpster. She turned. A tall, thin man stood there, wearing a faded coat and a knit cap pulled low over his forehead. He stood straighter than most homeless men, his eyes strangely clear. Gideon Cross. He did not ask for money. He did not hold out his hand. He simply gave a small nod. Lila unlocked the back door, slipped into the kitchen, filled a container with leftover soup from the day before, and added 2 slices of bread. Derek strictly forbade giving away leftover food. He said it was policy, cost control, principle. But Lila did not see policy in the hungry eyes of the man standing before her. She saw a human being. "Thank you, miss," Gideon said, his voice low and slow. He always called her that. Miss, not waitress, not kid. Lila handed him the container, her fingers brushing his hand, cold but steady. Not trembling like an addict's, not dull like a drunk's. He had been a soldier, she thought. There was something in the way he stood, in the way he scanned every corner of the back lot. In the kitchen, the coffee machine began to hiss. The workday started like a heavy machine grinding into motion. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Customers packed the diner. The clatter of dishes, shouting about cold coffee, forced laughter. Lila moved like a wind bound by chains, fast, precise, no mistakes allowed. Derek appeared close to noon, wearing an expensive leather jacket, his stomach pushing forward like a declaration. He opened the cash drawer and flipped through the bills. "Revenue is low," he snapped. "What are you standing there for? Sell more pastries. Sell more coffee. I do not pay you to daydream." Lila lowered her head. Not because she was weak, but because she was calculating. Her mother needed medicine. Caleb, her younger brother, needed tuition money. The rent hung over her like a blade. Derek thought she was just an ordinary waitress. He had no idea she was the one keeping the diner from collapsing, and he had no idea that beneath the basement, behind old wooden pallets, something was quietly waiting to explode. Not just a device, but a secret that could wipe everything away. That evening, when Lila closed up, Gideon was there again, but his eyes were different. No longer calm. Something sharp, like a blade in the dark, flickered there. "Miss," he said softly, "tomorrow do not open the diner. Come late. Let someone else open." "Not you." Lila let out a nervous laugh. "What are you talking about?" Gideon looked straight into her eyes, and in that moment, Lila understood something no one else had noticed. The homeless man standing in front of her was not weak. He was afraid. And he had never been afraid without a reason. They were going to kill her the next morning, and the only person who knew was a homeless man sleeping in an abandoned bus station. Lila did not sleep that night. She lay on the old sofa, eyes wide open, staring at the stained ceiling. Outside the window, wind tore through the bare trees, creating a long, metallic scraping sound against the glass. In the next room, her mother breathed heavily, coughing now and then. Caleb had not come home. Come late. "Let someone else open." Gideon's words repeated in her head like a slow, heavy drumbeat. He had never spoken nonsense. For 4 months he had simply accepted food, nodded in thanks, asked about her mother in that steady, low voice. Not talkative, not intrusive. But today his eyes had changed. They were no longer the eyes of a man merely surviving. They were the eyes of someone who had seen death approach before. Lila looked at the clock. 5:15 in the morning. If she did not go, Derek would explode. He had threatened to dock her pay for being 10 minutes late the week before. Rent was waiting, the electricity bill, the medication. But what if Gideon was right? Lila sat up abruptly. She walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water, and drank it in one long swallow. Her hand trembled slightly. She hated feeling out of control, hated choosing between two terrible options. Caleb walked in at that moment, his jacket dusted with snow, his face pale from the cold. He avoided her eyes. "Where have you been all night?" Lila asked, her voice low but firm. "Working extra," Caleb replied quickly. "Deliveries, nothing else." Nothing else. The answer was too smooth. Lila looked at his hands. A faint white powder clung to the dark sleeve of his jacket. She frowned. "What is that?" "Just sugar and salt," Caleb muttered, turning away toward the bathroom. Lila remained still. Sugar and salt did not carry that cold, metallic scent. A thought flashed through her mind. The blue bags in the basement, the tightly pressed white bricks. Derek whispering on the phone behind the kitchen last week. 2 unfamiliar men stepping out the back door close to midnight. Her stomach tightened. 5:25. If she did not leave now, she would be at least an hour late. Lila stepped into her mother's room. Evelyn opened her eyes, struggling to turn her head. "Going to work?" her mother asked, her speech slurred but her smile determined. Lila looked at her for a long moment. She could lose her job. But she could not let her mother lose her daughter. "I am going in a little late today," she said softly. "Go back to sleep." She reset the alarm for 7, then sat down on the sofa. She did not sleep. She waited. On the other side of the city, Gideon Cross did not sleep either. He sat in the darkness of the abandoned bus station, his back against the cold concrete wall, eyes open and alert. He had endured longer nights than this, in deserts, under the whistle of bullets. He knew how to wait. 2 nights earlier, around 3 a.m, he had heard an engine stop behind North Star Diner, a dark SUV. 3 men stepped out, Derek in his leather jacket, 2 others who moved like professionals, quick, quiet. Gideon had edged closer to the back door. It was slightly open. He heard every word. The device is under the threshold. When the key turns and the door pushes inward, the circuit triggers. Not a massive blast, enough to burn the front and whoever is standing closest, make it look like a gas leak, and the girl always opens at 6. Gideon had not felt cold then. He had felt recognition, like spotting a landmine hidden beneath thin sand. They were eliminating a witness. The girl had seen something in the basement she was not supposed to see. He could have walked away. It was not his problem. A homeless man should not involve himself with police. No one would believe him. They could easily accuse him instead. But Lila had fed him when she barely had enough herself. She looked at him like a human being, not trash. He could not let her die. At 5:30 a.m, Gideon found the old phone he still kept. The battery was weak, but enough for one call. 911. There is an explosive device under the threshold at North Star Diner. It will detonate when the door opens. He hung up before questions followed. 7:10 a.m. Tessa Ward stood outside the diner door, stamping her feet against the cold. She called Lila for the 3rd time. "Where are you, Lila? I have been standing here for over 30 minutes. Lila forced her voice to sound breathless. "I am sorry. My alarm did not go off. I am on my way." She put on her coat and stepped outside. She did not run. She walked slowly. As she turned onto West 7th, she stopped short. Police cars, a fire truck, yellow tape stretched across the sidewalk, a cluster of people whispering. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "What happened?" she asked a man nearby. "There was a bomb under the diner door. Police just disarmed it. Good thing no one opened early." Lila felt her knees weaken. Not just fear, something deeper. She stared at the door she touched every morning, where she turned the key and pushed it open. If she had done that today, her body might have been lying on that stretcher. An officer approached her. "Do you work here?" "Yes." "Are you the one who opens every morning?" Lila looked into his eyes. For a brief second, she felt as if she stood on an invisible edge. "Not today," she said slowly. "I came late." "Why?" "My alarm did not go off." The officer studied her longer than necessary, but he did not know that the truth stood across the street, hidden in the shadows of an abandoned bus station, and the man the entire city considered useless had just saved her life with a phone call that lasted less than a minute. If Lila had arrived on time, they would have gathered what was left of her into a black plastic bag. But she was standing on the snow-covered sidewalk, alive, breathing, and her world had just been turned upside down. Smoke from the fire truck still lingered in the air. Yellow tape trembled lightly in the wind. Tessa Ward stood near the entrance, her face pale, both hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "They said there was an explosive device under the threshold," Tessa stammered when she saw Lila. The bomb squad arrived just in time. If someone had just turned the key and pushed... She did not finish the sentence. Lila looked down at her hands. These were the hands that had turned that key every day for a year and a half. Every morning at exactly 6, never a minute late. Her heart pounded, not only because of the death she had narrowly escaped, but because of another thought, colder and sharper. They knew she was the one who opened the door. A police officer approached her. "Your name?" "Lila Monroe." "You work here?" "Yes." "What time do you usually open?" 6 o'clock. "Why were you late this morning?" Lila glanced over the officer's shoulder. Across the street, a gray civilian car had just pulled up. Two men stepped out, not in uniform, their eyes scanning the scene like blades. "Major crimes," Tessa whispered. Lila turned back to the officer. "My alarm did not go off," she said, her voice strangely calm. "My mother has health problems." "I was delayed." The officer nodded and wrote something down. He did not know that the delay was not an accident. He did not know that a homeless man had altered the course of her fate. An older man with a mustache walked toward her and showed his badge. "Detective Ronan Keller, I need to speak with you, Miss Monroe." His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of someone accustomed to seeing truth beneath dust and lies. They stepped aside, away from the crowd. "Have you noticed anything unusual recently?" "Strangers. Activity after closing hours." Lila was silent for a few seconds. In her mind, the pieces began to lock together. The blue bags in the basement. Derek blocking the doorway the day she came upstairs. Two men slipping out the back door late at night. Caleb with white powder on his sleeve. "Yes," she said slowly. "There were a few men who came after hours." They never sat in the main area, and in the basement, there were bags I did not recognize. Ronan's expression shifted. He was no longer looking at her as if she were a small-time waitress. "Can you show me?" Lila stepped past the yellow tape with him. She walked down the basement stairs, each step heavy. It was dark and cold down there, the smell of dampness mixed with flour. She pointed toward the corner behind the pallets. There. Two officers moved the pallets aside. 4 blue bags came into view. One officer wearing gloves cut the binding. Inside was not flour. White powder compressed into solid bricks, wrapped in clear plastic. Ronan let out a low whistle. "Fentanyl," he said. "A large quantity." Lila felt her stomach twist. The diner where she had worked for a year and a half had not only sold coffee and pancakes, it had been a distribution hub for a drug trafficking ring, and she had accidentally seen something she was never meant to see. As she climbed back up the stairs, Ronan followed behind her. "Do you understand what this means, Miss Monroe?" Lila turned to face him. "It means my boss is not just greedy, it means you are a witness. And this morning was not an accident." Outside, the sound of a car door slamming echoed sharply. Lila glanced through the small basement window. Derek Klein was being handcuffed. He no longer wore his usual bloated confidence. His face was flushed red, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. When his gaze met Lila's through the glass, there was a flicker of recognition. He understood the plan had failed, and the girl he had always dismissed was the reason. Lila did not feel pity. She felt anger. He had been ready to kill her, to stage it as a gas leak, an accident, a short line in the newspaper, all because she had seen a few bags in the basement. Outside, Caleb stood among the crowd, his face drained of color. When he saw the white bricks being loaded into an evidence vehicle, he stepped back. Lila looked at her brother. Their eyes met. He knew. Not everything, but enough to be afraid. Ronan stepped closer to Lila. "We will need your statement. You will be protected. There is a victim compensation fund in cases like this." "I lost my job, did I not?" Lila asked. "Possibly, but you are alive." Lila took a deep breath. The cold air cut into her lungs. She looked at the diner, the place that had swallowed her mornings, hidden drugs beneath its floor, and nearly become her grave. And she thought of Gideon, the man who slept in an abandoned bus station, the man the city refused to see. He had saved her life with a phone call that lasted less than a minute. Ronan followed her gaze. "Are you looking for someone?" "No," Lila replied quickly. "No one." But inside, she knew the truth. She was no longer the small waitress who endured shouting and humiliation. She was the key witness in a major criminal case, and perhaps, for the first time in her life, she was holding a kind of power no one could see. Derek Klein was not afraid of the police. He was afraid of her. As he was pushed into the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind his back, Derek still tried to turn his head to find Lila. Not to beg for mercy, not to show regret, but to measure how much she knew. Lila stood on the sidewalk, wind whipping her hair across her face. Her expression was so calm that it made Derek falter for a split second. He had always thought she was just an exhausted girl waiting tables to support a sick mother, an employee who could be replaced at any time. He never understood that she, with her quiet memory and sharp, observant eyes, had pieced together the picture he tried so hard to hide. The police car pulled away. The crowd slowly began to disperse. Ronan Keller stepped closer to her. "We have been tracking this ring for nearly a year," he said, "but we did not have solid evidence. This morning, the anonymous call gave us the exact location of the device." He looked directly into her eyes. "Do you know who made that call?" The question hung between them. Lila felt the weight of it. If she spoke Gideon's name, he would be dragged into questioning, a homeless man with a history of alcohol problems. A veteran without proper papers. In the eyes of the system, he would not be credible. But in her eyes, he was the only one who had not turned away. "I do not know," Lila replied evenly. "Maybe someone overheard something." Ronan studied her longer than necessary. He did not fully believe her, but he did not push. "If you remember anything, call me." He handed her his card. Lila slipped it into her coat pocket, where the overdue rent notice still rested like a silent reminder. Tessa approached them. "So the diner is closed for good. Until the investigation is complete," Ronan answered. "This is a crime scene." Tessa muttered a curse under her breath and walked away. Lila remained standing alone. She no longer had a job, no steady income, but she was alive, and for the first time, she understood how close she had come to becoming an anonymous statistic. At the far end of the block, Caleb leaned against a wall, his hands buried deep in his pockets. When Lila walked toward him, he avoided her eyes. "How long have you known about this?" Lila asked directly. Caleb stayed silent for a few seconds, then let out a breath. "I did not know about a bomb. I just delivered a few packages. Derek said it was protein powder. They paid in cash. I thought I could help you." "Help by getting involved with a drug ring?" Lila's voice was not loud, but it cut like ice. "I did not know it was drugs," Caleb said quickly. "I swear." Lila looked at her younger brother's face, still so young. He was only 17, still a child trying to act grown, and he had nearly been swallowed by the greed of adults. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "From now on, you stay away from all of them. If anyone contacts you, you tell me immediately." Caleb nodded, his eyes red. In the distance, beneath the overhang of the old bus station, a figure stood watching. Gideon Cross. He did not approach. He simply observed, like a silent sentry. Lila caught his gaze. No words of thanks were needed. No explanation, just the slightest nod. But when she moved across the street, he had already turned away. Lila hesitated for a second, then ran after him. "Where are you going?" she called out. Gideon stopped, but did not turn around right away. His voice was low and dry. "I should not be here while the police are still around." "You saved me," Lila said. "You know that." Gideon turned back. The fear that had flickered in his eyes the night before was gone, replaced by a deep exhaustion. "I only did what needed to be done. You know about explosives, do not you?" A brief silence. Wind lifted the edge of his worn coat. "I was a combat engineer," Gideon said slowly. 8 years, 2 deployments overseas. I know the smell of explosives. And I know the smell of a man about to kill to silence someone. Lila saw him differently now. The city saw a homeless man. She saw someone who had once worn a uniform, who had cleared mines from scorching sand. A man who had fallen out of the system but had not lost his instinct to protect. "Why did you leave when I came looking for you earlier?" Lila asked. "Because I did not want to become a suspect. Men like me are easy to blame." Lila felt her chest tighten. "You are not a suspect." You are a hero." Gideon gave a small shake of his head. Heroes do not sleep under rusted tin roofs. The words were not bitter, just plain truth. Lila looked around. The city was already moving on. Cars passed by. People talked about the failed explosion like an exciting morning story. But for her, everything had changed. She had lost her job, yet she held testimony that could send a major ring to prison. She could receive compensation, maybe enough to pay for her mother's medicine and cover the rent. And she carried a secret. The most underestimated man in the neighborhood had just proven he was the strongest among them. Lila stepped closer to Gideon. "I am not going to let this end here," she said softly. "Not just for me, for you too." Gideon looked at her, and for the first time in years, a faint light flickered in his eyes. "Be careful with big promises, miss." Lila smiled, even though her eyes were still red from the cold wind. "You taught me something this morning. Do not open a door when your instinct tells you it is a trap." And this time, she decided to open a different door. Not the door of the old diner, but the door that led out of the life everyone thought she deserved. They thought she was just a lucky waitress who had survived. They had no idea she was becoming the most crucial link in bringing down an entire operation. 3 days after the bomb was discovered, Lila sat in an interrogation room at the St. Paul Police Department. The room was small, gray walls, harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look more severe than it was. Detective Ronan Keller placed a thick file in front of her. "Derek Klein has confessed to part of it," he said, "but he is trying to shift the blame onto the other 2 men. He claims he did not know about the explosive device." Lila let out a cold laugh. "Did not know. He watched me every morning when I turned that key. He knew I was the one who opened the door." Ronan did not argue. He simply observed her. "We have confirmed the quantity of drugs in the basement," he continued. "The street value could reach into the millions. This was not a small-time group." Lila listened without feeling the shock she might once have expected. After standing so close to death, large numbers no longer made her tremble. "There was someone inside helping them," Ronan added. "A local officer attempted to delay the initial scene report that morning, but the anonymous call went directly to Central Dispatch." Lila understood. If the bomb squad had arrived even a few minutes later, she would have been the first victim. She thought for a second, then asked, "If the caller was a homeless veteran, would he be protected?" Ronan looked up. "You know who called." Lila took a deep breath. "I do. He did not want trouble, but without him, I would be dead." Ronan leaned back in his chair. "If he truly provided critical information that prevented a crime, there are protection programs and financial rewards. And if he is a veteran, we can coordinate with reintegration services." Lila felt her heart pound again, but this time not from fear, from hope. "I will convince him." That afternoon, she found Gideon at the old bus station. He was sitting on the concrete steps, scraping ice from the edge of his boot with a small knife. "They are looking for you," Lila said as soon as she approached. Gideon looked up, cautious. "I told you I do not want to get involved." "They are not looking to accuse you. They want to thank you." "There is a reward. There are programs for veterans." Gideon let out a dry laugh. "A reward. That system forgot about me a long time ago." Lila sat down beside him despite the freezing concrete. "You saved me. Now let me save you." Gideon was silent. Wind swept through the bus station, carrying the scent of metal and exhaust. "I once had a house," he said slowly. "My wife died while I was deployed overseas. I came back with memories that would not let me sleep. Alcohol was the only thing that silenced them. I lost my job, lost my son, lost everything." His voice did not shake, but each word felt heavy. "They did not forget you," Lila replied. "They just did not look closely enough." Gideon studied her. There was no pity in her eyes, only resolve. "Fine," he said at last. "I will speak to them. But if this turns the wrong way, you stay out of it." That evening, Gideon sat across from Ronan Keller in the same interrogation room where Lila had been. He recounted everything. The SUV. The conversation about the device under the threshold. The plan to stage it as a gas leak. His voice was steady, precise, no unnecessary detail. Ronan listened carefully. When Gideon finished, he nodded. "We checked your military record. You were honorably discharged after an injury." Gideon did not respond. He looked down at his calloused hands. "There is a reward fund for individuals who provide information that prevents domestic terrorism," Ronan continued. "In this case, you qualify. In addition, we have contacted Veteran Support Services. You can enter a rehabilitation center next week." Gideon looked up. For the first time, the doubt in his eyes wavered. "For a phone call that lasted less than a minute," Ronan said, "and because you did not turn away." When they stepped outside the station, snow had begun to fall again. Lila was waiting near the entrance. "Well?" she asked. Gideon looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "It seems I might have a roof soon." Lila smiled, relief spreading through her body. "And you," Ronan said as he approached. "The Victim Compensation Fund has been approved. The amount is significant." "How much?" Lila asked. "Enough that you will not have to worry about rent for a long time. Enough for your mother to receive the medication and care she needs." Lila closed her eyes for a second. Only days ago she had been terrified of losing her job, afraid to be late by even an hour. Now that very delay had opened another path. Derek Klein believed he had the power to decide who lived and who died, but he had misjudged the wrong person. He underestimated the girl who opened the door every morning. He did not realize that behind her exhaustion was a will forged from steel. And he never imagined that the man sleeping under a rusted roof still carried the instincts of a soldier. Snow fell thicker. Lila looked at Gideon, then up at the gray sky. One door had not been opened that morning, and because of that, another door was slowly beginning to open. Derek Klein believed everything had been calculated perfectly. He never imagined that a phone call lasting less than a minute would destroy the empire he had built over 2 years. 1 week later, the news spread across St. Paul. North Star Diner was officially sealed. Derek's 2 associates were arrested while attempting to leave the state. The local officer who had tried to delay the scene report was suspended for obstructing the investigation. The city talked about the incident like an exciting morning headline, but for Lila, it was not a sensational story. It was the line between life and death. She sat at the kitchen table, a compensation approval letter in front of her. The number printed on it made her read it twice. It was not wealth, but it was enough to breathe. Her mother sat in the living room, her right hand trembling slightly as she held a cup of tea. Since a nurse had begun visiting a few hours each day, she looked less exhausted. "You will not have to go back to that diner, will you?" her mother asked with difficulty. "No," Lila replied. "I will never open that door again." She said it gently, but inside it felt like an oath. Caleb walked in carrying his school bag. He had returned to classes after meeting with a counselor. His eyes were different now, less defensive, more remorseful. "I am sorry I hid it from you," he said quietly. Lila looked at her younger brother. "If that bomb had gone off, you would have lived with that for the rest of your life." "We start over," she said. But this time, no shortcuts. That afternoon, Lila visited the Veteran Rehabilitation Center where Gideon was temporarily staying. The building was not new, but it was warm, carrying the scent of coffee and clean soap. Gideon sat in the common room wearing a freshly issued shirt, his hair trimmed neatly. He seemed taller, his back straighter. "They said I can move into a supported apartment within a month," he told her. "There is counseling. There is part-time work if I want it." "Do you want it?" Lila asked. Gideon was quiet for a moment. "I have been used to not wanting anything at all, but perhaps it is time to change that." Lila smiled. "I feel the same way." She placed a stack of papers on the table. "This is my preliminary business plan." Gideon raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning to do?" "Open a café." He looked at her as if she had just said she intended to fly to the moon. "You just survived an attempted murder. You lost your job. And you want to open a café?" "Exactly because of that," Lila answered. "I have opened doors for others for too long. It is time to open one for myself." She spread out a small floor plan, a space of about 45 square meters on the edge of the neighborhood. It used to be a small bakery. The rent was reasonable. Renovation costs were manageable. "I will call it Kind Haven Café," she said, "a place where people can walk in without fear of being judged, a place that does not hide drugs under the floorboards." Gideon studied the drawing, then looked at her. "You know running a business is not easy." "I know. But I know how to work, and I know what it feels like to be underestimated. I will not let my employees live the way I did." Gideon leaned back in his chair. He had once believed his life had ended in that abandoned bus station. Now in front of him stood a woman the city once overlooked, speaking about the future with fire in her eyes. "You did not just survive," he said. "You are overturning the board." Lila gave a small laugh. "Maybe, but I need someone who understands security, someone who can recognize danger before it explodes." Gideon understood the meaning beneath her words. "You want me to help." "I want you to be the first person I hire." He laughed, genuinely this time. "A former homeless combat engineer as a security consultant for a small cafe." "It sounds insane." "Or perfect," Lila replied. Outside the rehabilitation center window, the snow was beginning to melt. Sheets of ice cracked apart, revealing dark, wet pavement beneath. An old chapter had ended, not with an explosion, but with a decision. That evening, Lila walked past the location she intended to rent. The glass door was dusty, the old sign faded. No lights, no scent of coffee, just an empty space. She stood in front of it, her hand resting on the cold metal handle. This time there was no bomb beneath the threshold, no trap, only a future not yet formed. She did not turn the key. Not yet. But in her heart, the door had already opened. 3 months ago, Lila Monroe nearly died beneath the threshold of an ordinary diner. 3 months later, she stood before a different door, holding a key that belonged to her. There was no yellow police tape, no patrol cars, only a blank wooden sign swaying gently in the early spring wind. Kind Haven Café. The name had not yet been hung outside, but it already existed clearly in her mind, more solid than anything before it. The small shop was less than 50 square meters, the old wooden floor creaking with every step. Paint peeled from the walls, and dust covered the counter. Yet morning light streamed through the front window, casting a warm, golden strip across the empty room. Lila stood in the center of that space and took a deep breath. This was where she would open the door every day. Not for Derek, not for a corrupt system, but for herself. Gideon stood behind her, his arms folded across his chest. He had gained a little weight since entering the rehabilitation center. His back was straighter, his eyes no longer clouded by exhaustion. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Lila turned, her smile tired but unwavering. "I once opened a door for death without knowing it. Now I am opening one for opportunity. That is a big difference." They began working that very day, repainting the walls, scrubbing the floor, replacing the locks. Gideon inspected every corner, every wire, every vent, as if he were still in uniform. He did not speak much, but every movement had purpose. One afternoon, as Lila sat at a makeshift wooden table calculating expenses, the shop door chimed softly. A man stepped inside, sleeves of his shirt rolled up, shoes dusted with soil. In his hands he carried a small wooden crate filled with deep red tomatoes and glossy green apples. "I heard someone is opening a cafe here," he said. "My name is Noah Ashford. I supply produce to a few places in the area." Lila stood and wiped her hands on her jeans. "We are not officially open yet," she said. "But yes, I am preparing." Noah set the crate on the counter. "I like working with people who start from scratch," he said. "They care more about quality than volume." Lila examined the tomatoes, rich in color, skin stretched and firm, nothing like the cheap industrial produce she used to see at North Star Diner. "I do not have much money to place large orders," she said honestly. Noah shrugged. "I am not a large corporation either. I choose my customers the way I choose partners." Gideon watched from a distance. He did not trust easily. But Noah's eyes did not shift away or calculate. Lila bought a small amount to test. When she cooked her first pot of soup with those ingredients, the small shop filled with a scent that was rich and real. Opening day arrived faster than she expected. She did not make it grand. No banners, no loud announcements, just a small handwritten sign placed outside. "First 10 customers free." That morning, Lila stood behind the newly installed counter, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the key into the lock. She paused for a second. The memory of that fateful morning flashed before her. The yellow tape, the bomb beneath the threshold, Derek's eyes as he was handcuffed. She inhaled deeply, then turned the key. The door opened. No explosion. Only the clear chime of a small bell. The first person to walk in was an elderly man wearing a gray knit cap. "I remember you," he said. "You used to serve me at the old place. Your coffee was always better than the rest." Lila smiled. "Today I am not serving anyone. Today it is my treat." Slowly, more people stepped inside. Curious neighbors. A few who had heard the news about the arrests. They looked at her as someone who had survived something extraordinary. But Lila did not want to be remembered for the bomb. She wanted to be remembered for a warm cup of coffee and a gaze that did not judge. In one corner, her mother sat on a high stool behind the register. She still spoke slowly, but enough to greet customers. Caleb helped carry chairs and wipe tables. He stood taller now, his eyes steadier. Gideon remained near the entrance, quietly observing. No longer the man sleeping under a rusted roof, he was the guardian of the door. Noah delivered a second batch of produce later that morning. He did not say much, simply placed a few more crates of fruit down and gave Lila a nod. She looked around the small café, listening to spoons tapping against cups, soft laughter, the sound of the door opening and closing. No one there knew that only months ago she had stood inches from death. No one knew that the man standing silently by the entrance had once been dismissed by the entire city. But it no longer mattered. Lila glanced at the wooden plaque she had just hung on the wall. "Kindness finds its way home." She had opened doors for others for too long. Now she was opening one for herself, and for anyone who needed a safe place. Not because she was lucky to survive, but because she had decided not to let fear define her life. 6 months ago, Lila Monroe was a waitress who nearly died beneath a bomb-rigged door. 6 months later, she stood in the middle of her own cafe and refused a buyout offer worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The offer arrived on a rainy early summer afternoon. Kind Haven Cafe had begun to fill more steadily. Not because of loud marketing or flashy promotions, but through word of mouth. People spoke about a small place where the owner remembered your name, where soup was made from truly fresh vegetables, where you could sit for hours without being pushed to order more. Lila was wiping down the counter when the door opened. 3 men stepped inside, dark suits, polished shoes, eyes searching not for coffee but for opportunity. "We represent a regional cafe chain," the man in the middle said. "We are interested in this location, and in you." Lila did not immediately invite them to sit. She noticed the way they scanned the room, measuring the space with their eyes. He placed a folder on the counter. "We are offering to acquire the entire brand and property for $300,000. You would remain as branch manager with a high salary and stability, no risk. $300,000. The number was larger than anything Lila had ever held in her hands. enough to clear every debt. Enough to move her mother into a better care facility. Enough for Caleb to attend college without fear. Gideon stood near the entrance, silent. Noah was in the storage room behind, overhearing fragments. Lila looked at the contract. For a brief second, she saw North Star Diner again, the polished signage, the decisions made behind closed office doors, the white powder hidden beneath the floorboards. Money was not always clean. If we acquire the business, the man continued, we will standardize the menu, reduce ingredient costs, increase service speed, optimize profit margins. Reduce ingredient costs. Lila thought of Noah handpicking crates of tomatoes. She thought of the soup she cooked every morning from fresh vegetables. She thought of the elderly widow who sat in the corner with 1 cup of tea and was allowed to remain all afternoon. Kind Haven was not a formula to optimize. It was a choice. She closed the folder. Thank you for the offer, she said calmly, but I am not selling. The man raised an eyebrow. You understand the value we are presenting? I do, Lila replied. But I did not build this place to sell it. The air in the cafe shifted, no longer warm. You are turning down a major opportunity, he said. I once refused to open a door and it saved my life, Lila answered. I learned that not every opportunity should be taken. They left, their footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Noah stepped out from the back room. $300,000, he said quietly. Are you sure? Lila met his gaze without hesitation. I have lived in fear of losing money for too long. I do not want to live in fear of losing myself. Noah smiled slowly. That is what I like about you. Gideon approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. You just refused another explosion, he said. Lila laughed softly. Not a bomb, but something that could have destroyed us from the inside. That evening, after closing, Lila sat alone behind the counter. Most of the lights were off, leaving only a soft glow in one corner. She opened her ledger. The numbers were not large. Profit was modest, just enough to keep everything running, but every dollar was clean. Caleb came downstairs from the small apartment where they temporarily lived near the cafe. Do you regret it? He asked, turning down the money. Lila thought for a moment. Do you know what scared me most the morning they found the bomb? Caleb shook his head. Not dying. What scared me was that I could have died without ever living the way I wanted. He sat down across from her. So, are you living the way you want now? Lila looked around the small cafe. The wooden tables she and Gideon had painted themselves, the photos of customers pinned on the wall, the quiet line behind the counter that read, Kindness finds its way home. Not perfect, she said, but right. Outside, the city continued to operate on the logic of profit. People bought, sold, acquired, optimized. Inside this small space, a woman once considered ordinary had just refused $300,000 because she would not trade the soul of what she created. No applause followed. No headlines appeared. Only the quiet of a decision that felt true. And sometimes that is what real power looks like. Not every battle comes with an explosion. Some are fought in silence, between fear and faith. 1 year after the bomb was disarmed, Kind Haven Cafe was no longer an unfamiliar little shop. It had become a steady heartbeat of the neighborhood. In the mornings, office workers stopped by for coffee to go. In the afternoons, students filled the tables with books and laptops. In the evenings, tired souls drifted in, drawn by the warm light that spilled onto the sidewalk. But growth did not arrive without tension. One late evening, as Lila locked the door, she noticed a familiar vehicle parked across the street, a black SUV, tinted windows. Her chest tightened. Derek Klein had been sentenced, but the men who once worked for him had not completely disappeared. Gideon appeared beside her like a shadow. I have seen them watching for 2 days, he said quietly. Lila did not ask how he knew. Gideon always saw what others overlooked. What do they want? She asked. Maybe just to see if you are afraid." Lila looked at the SUV. The cold memory of that fateful morning rushed back, the threshold, the yellow tape. But this time she did not tremble. "Call the police," Caleb suggested from behind them. He was 18 now, nearly as tall as Gideon, his gaze steadier. "Not yet," Lila said. She stepped onto the sidewalk and stood upright beneath the streetlight. The glow illuminated a face no longer marked by the exhaustion of a worn-down waitress. The SUV engine started. It rolled forward slowly, then drove away. "Just a message. We are still here." Lila went back inside. She knew she could not live forever in the shadow of the past. The next day, she called Detective Ronan Keller. "I think someone has been watching the café," she said. Ronan did not sound surprised. "We have heard that a few former members of the ring are trying to reorganize, but they no longer have supply lines, and they know we are watching." He paused. "You are not an easy target anymore." The statement carried weight. Lila was no longer just a witness. She was someone who had helped bring down a major operation. She had connections. She had a voice. And most importantly, she was no longer ruled by fear. That night, after closing, she sat down with Gideon and Noah. "I do not want this place to live in fear," she said. "It will not," Noah replied. "But we have to be proactive." Gideon nodded. "Install more cameras, upgrade the locks, and never close alone." Lila looked at the two men before her. One had once slept under a rusted roof. The other had first walked in carrying a crate of tomatoes. Now, both stood firmly beside her. "I cannot protect everything," she said softly, "but I can protect what I build." A week later, they hosted their first community event at the café, a free storytelling evening. Neighbors brought folding chairs, pastries, even instruments. Gideon stood up to speak. He did not begin with the battlefield. He began with the freezing bus station, with the feeling of becoming invisible, with a girl who brought hot soup on a winter night. "If she had not looked at me like a human being," he said, "I might not have seen the bomb under that threshold." The room fell silent. Lila stood behind the counter, her eyes wet. She had once believed her act was small, a container of soup, a slice of bread, but kindness is never small. It only needs the right moment. After the event, a middle-aged woman approached Lila. "I read about your story," she said. "I run a small fund that supports local businesses. If you ever want to expand, we would like to help." Lila smiled. She remembered the $300,000 offer and the feeling of refusing it. This was different. This was not acquisition. It was partnership. She looked around the cafe, at the people laughing and talking, at Caleb stacking chairs, at Noah discussing produce with customers, at Gideon standing proudly near the door like a guardian. A year ago, she had almost become a victim. Now she stood at the center of a community. The black SUV never returned. Perhaps they understood she was no longer the girl who could be erased by a single blast. She was someone who had stepped across the threshold of death and chosen to live on her own terms. And when you have faced the worst without breaking, the remaining shadows are nothing more than whispers in the wind. 2 years ago, Lila Monroe nearly became a name etched onto a memorial plaque. 2 years later, she stood in front of a newly leased building, blueprints for the second Kind Haven Cafe branch in her hands. Not out of ambition, but out of need. The first cafe had grown too crowded on weekends. Lines stretched onto the sidewalk, not just for coffee, but for a space where people felt seen. Expansion meant risk, and risk had once nearly killed her. Noah stood beside her, studying the plans spread across the hood of his car. "This is the north side of the city," he said. "Lower income, fewer options." "They need a place like this." Lila nodded. She did not want Kind Haven to become a polished brand for the wealthy. She wanted it to exist where hope often arrived late. Gideon leaned on his metal cane and examined the old building. "The structure is solid," he said, "but the electrical system needs replacing, and I want to inspect the foundation." He spoke like an engineer, not like a man who once slept in an abandoned bus station. Lila looked at him. 2 years ago, he had been afraid to walk into a police station. Now, he advised architects on security standards. "Do you ever regret making that phone call?" she asked suddenly. Gideon thought for a moment. "No. But I regret believing I had no value left." The words settled quietly between them. The new branch opened in early autumn. No grand spectacle, but enough to draw attention in the neighborhood. On the first day, a group of teenagers walked in, loud and skeptical. "A cafe like this here," one of them said. Lila stepped forward, not defensive. "This neighborhood deserves good coffee too," she replied. The boy glanced at the menu. "Not as expensive as I expected." Lila smiled. "I know what it feels like to be excluded because you cannot afford something. I do not want anyone walking out that door for that reason." News of the second location spread quickly. A small article in the local paper described her as a survivor who turned tragedy into opportunity. Lila did not like the word survivor. She preferred the word choice. One evening, while they were cleaning up, Noah rested his hand on the counter. "We should think about getting married," he said simply. Lila looked up, surprised. There was no elaborate proposal, no kneeling, no sparkling diamond ring, just a sincere suggestion between still warm coffee cups. "We have built too much together," Noah continued. "I do not want to be only your business partner." Lila studied him. She had once feared attachment, feared loss, feared that anything beautiful could be destroyed in a single morning. But she had learned that avoidance did not erase danger. "Yes," she said softly, "not because we complete each other, but because we choose to walk together." Noah smiled with relief. The wedding took place inside the first café. No luxury, no expensive gown, just the wooden tables they had painted themselves, warm yellow lights, and the scent of freshly roasted coffee. Lila Monroe sat in the front row, her hand trembling but her eyes brighter than ever. Caleb stood beside his sister, tall and confident, and Gideon Cross, wearing a carefully altered old suit, walked her down the aisle. As he placed her hand into Noah's, he whispered so only she could hear, "Miss, you chose the right door." Lila felt her throat tighten. After the guests had left, she stood alone outside the cafe. Streetlights reflected against the glass. 2 years earlier, she had stood on a different sidewalk, staring at police tape and fire trucks. Same city, entirely different life. Gideon stepped outside and stood beside her. "You know the strangest part?" he said. "What is that?" "If you had not been late that morning, none of this would exist." Lila looked at him. "I do not think it was fate," she replied. "I think it was a chain of choices." He nodded. "And the first choice was giving a stranger a container of hot soup." Lila smiled. "Kindness is not loud. It does not demand attention. But its impact can be more powerful than any explosive device." Inside, Noah's laughter echoed as he cleared the tables. Kind Haven Cafe now had 2 locations, steady revenue, not extravagant wealth, but enough to live, to pay fair wages, to keep prices accessible. Lila was no longer the underestimated girl. She was the woman who built a place where no one else would be underestimated. And to her, that was the greatest victory of all. 3 years ago, Lila Monroe believed her future stretched no further than one morning shift to the next. Now, she stood in the small office behind the second location, studying the development plan for a third Kind Haven Cafe, not because of limitless ambition, but because the request had come from the very neighborhood that once viewed her as a victim. "We want a Kind Haven in the South District," the community council representative had said during the meeting. "There is no decent place to gather there, no safe space." Safe space. The phrase had once never existed in her world. That day, Lila looked around the meeting room at people of all ages, laborers, teachers, students. They did not see her as the girl who almost died in a bombing. They saw her as someone capable of building something lasting. After the meeting, Gideon lowered himself into a chair and rubbed his knee, which ached whenever the weather turned cold. 3 cafes in 3 years, he said. Do you not think you are moving a little fast? Lila gave a soft laugh. You once told me to be careful with big promises. That is right. I am not promising the city anything, she replied. I promised myself I would not shrink because of fear. Gideon studied her. He remembered the woman standing on a snow-covered sidewalk, trembling but upright. She had changed, though not in the way he expected. She was not harder, she was clearer. Meanwhile, Noah discussed financial strategy. He did not want heavy loans or to lose the independence they had fought to preserve. We can partner with a local fund, he suggested. No equity sale, just support with conditions that we maintain pricing and quality. Lila nodded. She had learned that money itself was not the enemy. The source and the conditions attached were what shaped the soul of a place. The third location was built inside an old structure that had once been an abandoned convenience store. They kept part of the original brick wall exposed as a reminder that anything could be rebuilt. On opening day, a light rain fell. It was not as crowded as the previous launches, but those who entered carried quiet hope in their eyes. A boy about 10 years old sat near the door, working on his math homework. Can I stay for a while? He asked, gripping his notebook. You can stay as long as you like, Lila replied, as long as you do not mind the smell of coffee. The boy grinned. In another corner, a young mother with dark circles under her eyes sipped tea in silence while holding her baby. Gideon stood by the entrance as he always did. He did not need to speak. His presence alone made the wrong kind of curiosity hesitate. One afternoon, while Lila reviewed accounts, a local reporter came for an interview. You turned a near-fatal tragedy into 3 successful businesses, he said. What is your secret? Lila did not answer immediately. If I say it was luck, that would not honor the nights I could not sleep. If I say it was individual effort, that would ignore the people who stood beside me. Then what is it? Lila looked through the window. Caleb was showing a new employee how to prepare coffee. Noah was reviewing invoices with a farmer over the phone. Gideon was helping an elderly man adjust his chair. It is refusing to let tragedy define you, she said, and refusing to let success make you forget why you started. The reporter nodded and wrote it down. That evening, after closing the third location, they gathered at the first café where everything had begun. Evelyn Monroe could now take a few steps with a walker. She looked at her daughter with a pride that needed no words. Caleb had enrolled in community college, studying business management. He wanted to help expand the cafes without losing their identity. Gideon lifted his cup of tea. I once believed I had passed my expiration date, he said. It turns out I was just waiting for the right place to stand. Lila looked at him, then at Noah. 3 years earlier, she had only wanted to survive until the next day. Now she was building something that might outlive her. She was not wealthy in the way newspapers described success. No luxury cars, no mansion, but she had 3 cafes where people were treated like human beings. And sometimes that is the quietest revolution of all. Outside, the rain had stopped. The wet pavement reflected the warm yellow glow of the Kind Haven sign. Lila remembered the morning she had not opened the old door. If she had turned that key, the story would have ended there. But she had chosen to pause, and that pause set off a chain of change no one could measure in money. Not every explosion destroys. Some happen silently within, the moment a person decides they will no longer live small. 4 years ago, Lila Monroe nearly died beneath a bomb-rigged door. 4 years later, she stood inside her very first cafe, holding her daughter in her arms while laughter filled the room. The baby was named Hope. Not because life had been easy, but because hope was the one thing that kept her standing when everything else nearly collapsed. Hope slept against her mother's chest, soft hair brushing Lila's neck. Noah was speaking with a new supplier near the counter. Caleb had graduated and now managed part of the operations. Evelyn sat by the window, her gentle eyes following her granddaughter. And Gideon Cross stood by the door, as always. But he was no longer a silent shadow. He had his own apartment, regular counseling appointments, a steady salary overseeing security for all 3 locations. His coat was clean, his shoes polished, his silver hair neatly combed. A new customer stepped inside, glanced around, then asked quietly, "Are you the owner?" Gideon smiled faintly. "No, I just keep the door." Lila heard him and smiled. The one who keeps the door. The phrase carried more meaning than most would ever know. Later that afternoon, when the café grew quieter, Lila sat beside him. "Do you remember that morning?" she asked. "The morning you did not open the door?" "Yes." Gideon looked out at the street. Light snow was falling, just like on that fateful day years ago. "I remember it clearly," he said. "I thought if you had not listened, I would have carried that weight for the rest of my life." Lila tightened her hold on her daughter. "If I had not listened, I would not have any of this." Gideon turned toward her. "Have you ever wondered why you did listen?" Lila considered the question. "Because I trusted you." "No," Gideon said softly. "Because you were used to listening to your instincts. You always observed. You always noticed small things. That is why you saw me when others only saw a homeless man." Lila fell silent. She once believed her kindness was weakness, something that made her vulnerable. Yet it was that same kindness that saved her. That evening they held a small gathering to mark 4 years since opening. Nothing extravagant, just familiar faces, a simple cake, a few warm words. Noah raised his glass. "To the doors that were never opened." Caleb added, "And to the doors that were opened at the right time." Laughter rippled through the room. Gideon stood, his voice low but steady. "I once believed I had reached the end of my usefulness, that I had been left behind. Maybe I was just waiting for a chance to do the right thing." He looked at Lila. This woman did not just survive. She chose to live with purpose, and when someone does that, they give others the courage to do the same. Lila felt her throat tighten. She remembered that morning, the phone call at 7:10, the police tape, Derek's eyes as he was handcuffed. She remembered the trembling decision to arrive late. A small decision. But life often turns on small decisions like that. When most of the guests had gone home, Lila stood at the entrance, holding Hope close. She looked at the sign on the wall, the words that had been there since the beginning. "Kindness finds its way home." She once thought it was simply a beautiful phrase. Now she knew it was true. A container of soup on a winter night could become a life-saving phone call. A phone call could bring down a criminal ring. That collapse could become the foundation of a new life. If you are hearing this story now, perhaps you are standing before a door of your own. Maybe it is a door of fear, of doubt, of a difficult choice. Lila once stood before such a door. She chose not to open it, and that choice opened everything else. If this story helps you believe even a little more in the power of small acts, share your thoughts. Leave a comment about where you are listening from, and if you want to hear more stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change, follow this journey. Because sometimes one small decision can change the direction of an entire life. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If there is one thing Lila has taught us, it is this. The small decisions we make today can change our entire tomorrow. One late arrival, one container of soup given away, one warning that is taken seriously. None of us ever truly know which moment will become the turning point. If this story touched you, leave a comment and share the city you are watching from. I would truly love to see how far this journey has reached. If you believe that kindness is never wasted, take a moment to like this video and help spread that message. And do not forget to follow the channel so you will not miss the next stories about ordinary people who go on to create extraordinary change. Because the next story might be exactly the one you need to hear at just the right time.